I never imagined that the moment meant to honor my grandfather's memory would become the day I discovered just how little my own family valued me. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the Manhattan high-rise felt suffocating despite its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished mahogany table, but there was no warmth in that light. My brother Preston sat directly across from me, his perfectly tailored suit and smug expression making my stomach churn. My parents flanked him on either side, my mother Cynthia with her trademark pearls and my father Edward with his steel-gray eyes that had never quite looked at me with approval. The attorney, Harrison Webb, cleared his throat and began reading from the thick document before him. His voice was measured, professional, devoid of emotion as he detailed the last will and testament of Arthur Vance, my grandfather, the man who had built Vance Industries from nothing into a billion-dollar empire. When Harrison announced that Preston would inherit all shares of Vance Industries, the Manhattan properties, and liquid assets exceeding $3 billion, I felt my breath catch. I had expected this. Preston was the golden child, groomed since birth to take over the family business, but expecting something and experiencing it are two very different things. Preston leaned back in his chair, that infuriating half-smile playing at his lips as he glanced at me. My mother reached over and squeezed his hand, pride radiating from her. Then Harrison turned to the next page, and every eye in the room shifted toward me. My heart hammered as I waited to hear what my grandfather had left me. To my granddaughter Almira, Harrison read, I leave the property located in Whispering Pines, Oregon, including the log cabin and all its contents. The silence that followed was deafening. That was it, a cabin I had never seen in a place I had never been, somewhere 3,000 miles from everything I had ever known. My mother was the first to break the silence. She let out a long, theatrical sigh, then whispered just loud enough for everyone to hear, a rotting shack in the middle of nowhere. How utterly humiliating. My father turned those calculating eyes on me, his jaw tight. The old man must have lost his mind at the end. This makes no sense whatsoever. But it was Preston who delivered the final blow. He walked around the table and placed his hand on my shoulder, fingers digging in just hard enough to hurt. Don't worry, little sister. At least you'll have somewhere to hide away from the world. Maybe you can paint some pictures of the squirrels out there. He laughed, and the sound echoed through the room like broken glass. I sat frozen, the rusty key Harrison had placed in my palm, feeling impossibly heavy. Around me, whispers started. I caught fragments like disappointing and what a shame. But their voices faded, drowned out by the roaring in my ears. I had spent my entire life trying to earn my place in this family. While Preston had been handed everything, I had worked twice as hard for half the recognition. I had graduated summa cum laude from NYU with a degree in design and architecture. I had started my own small firm focusing on sustainable urban development, had won awards for innovative approaches to affordable housing, but none of that had ever been enough. My father had made it clear that, unless I was bringing in billions like Preston would, my accomplishments were merely hobbies that didn't really matter. And now this. The final proof that even my grandfather had viewed me as an afterthought. That evening, I barely had time to reach my small Brooklyn apartment before my phone rang. My father's name flashed on the screen. Come to the penthouse. Now. His voice left no room for argument. 40 minutes later, I stood in the cavernous living room of my parents' penthouse. My father stood by the windows, looking out over Manhattan. My mother perched on the edge of a white leather sofa. Preston lounged in an armchair, swirling expensive scotch. My father turned abruptly, slamming a thick folder onto the coffee table. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've made this entire family look like fools. Preston is about to take control of a global empire, and you get handed garbage. The press is going to see it as weakness, as division in the family. I opened my mouth to respond, but he wasn't finished. Preston needs the image of a united, powerful family behind him. Your existence right now is an embarrassment, a stain on everything we've built. The words landed like physical blows. Not the situation is embarrassing, your existence. I felt something crack inside my chest. Preston set down his glass. Come on, Dad. Let's be honest with Almira. Grandfather gave her that place because she couldn't handle anything important, a failed designer with projects nobody's ever heard of. He gave her somewhere out of the way so she wouldn't mess up the things that actually matter. I found my voice. That's not fair. You don't know why Grandfather made this choice. Preston laughed. The reason is that you're not capable of handling real responsibility. My father crossed the room and grabbed my arm, fingers digging into my flesh. Listen carefully. You are going to take your cabin and go to Oregon. Stay there and keep your head down until this blows over. Don't come back until you have something that makes you worth associating with this family. He released me abruptly. Before I could process what had happened, my mother walked to a closet and emerged with an empty suitcase. She threw it at my feet, the handle hitting my shin. Pack your things, she said coldly. And don't expect any financial support from us. I looked from one face to another. These were the people who were supposed to love me. Instead, they looked at me like I was an embarrassment to be removed from sight. Something shifted in that moment. The pain began to transmute into something harder. For the first time in my life, I saw them clearly. Saw our family dynamic without the filter of hope that had colored my perception. I bent down, picked up the suitcase, and met my father's eyes. Fine, I'll go. The next 3 days were a blur. I gave notice at my architecture firm, packed up my apartment, and began the long drive west. 3,000 miles stretched before me. As I crossed the George Washington Bridge and left Manhattan behind, I felt an unexpected lightness, as if with every mile I drove, I was shedding layers of expectation and disappointment. The drive took 5 days. I stayed in cheap motels, watching the landscape transform from urban sprawl to farmlands to mountains. By the time I crossed into Oregon, I was exhausted but oddly exhilarated. Whispering Pines announced itself with a weathered wooden sign. The town was small, built around a main street that looked frozen in time around 1950. There was a hardware store, a diner called Maggie's, a post office. The forest pressed in on all sides, towering Douglas firs that seemed to dwarf everything human. A thin mist hung in the air, lending everything a dreamlike quality. I followed the directions to increasingly narrow roads until I was driving on little more than a dirt track. And then I saw it. My inheritance. The cabin was worse than I had imagined. The log structure sagged on its foundation, the roof clearly leaked, and the porch looked ready to collapse. Windows were grimy with years of dirt, and the whole place had an air of abandonment. I sat in my car for a long moment and felt tears prick at my eyes. This was what my grandfather had thought I deserved. But then I thought about my father's words, about how my existence was an embarrassment, and something stubborn hardened inside me. I turned off the engine, grabbed my bags, and marched up to the front door. The key stuck in the lock but eventually turned with a grinding screech. The door swung open, and I stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, every surface covered in dust. Furniture sat shrouded in old sheets. The kitchen looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970 seconds. But it was also mine, truly mine in a way nothing else had ever been. I spent the first week cleaning obsessively and taking stock of repairs needed. The town was curious but not intrusive. Maggie from the diner brought me a casserole and welcomed me. Tom at the hardware store helped me figure out supplies and gave me a discount because I was Arthur's granddaughter. It was during the second week, while repairing rotted floorboards near the kitchen, that everything changed. I was on my hands and knees, prying up damaged boards with a crowbar, when the wood gave way suddenly. My hand plunged through into empty space below. Startled, I pulled back and peered down into darkness. There was space under the floor, more than there should be. I grabbed my flashlight and widened the hole. A set of narrow wooden stairs led down into darkness. The stairs led to a heavy steel door with a keypad. I tried obvious codes, then on a whim, tried the date of my college graduation. The keypad beeped, and locks disengaged. The door swung open. What I found beyond defied explanation. It wasn't a root cellar. It was a fully equipped laboratory with state-of-the-art computers, workbenches covered in prototypes, and walls lined with filing cabinets. The air smelled of metal and ozone. Everything was neat and organized. On the main workbench sat a device about the size of a small refrigerator, covered in instruments. Next to it was a thick binder filled with technical specifications. But it was the desk in the corner that drew me like a magnet. On it sat a leather-bound journal. My hands shook as I picked it up and opened to the first page. The handwriting was my grandfather's. "To Almira, my guiding star," it began. "If you are reading this, then you have found what I truly left for you. I did not leave you money, because money can be taken away, stolen, squandered. I did not leave you shares in Vance Industries, because that company is built on foundations that are beginning to crack. What I left you is far more valuable. I left you the future, a future that your father and brother lack the vision and the integrity to steward." My legs gave out, and I sank into the desk chair. My grandfather hadn't abandoned me. He had chosen me specifically, deliberately. I kept reading. For the last decade of his life, my grandfather had been secretly working on revolutionary clean energy technology that could fundamentally change how the world generated and stored power. He had done it here, away from the corporate machinery of Vance Industries. He wrote about his growing disillusionment with the company, how it had been taken over by people who cared only about profits. He wrote about Preston's reckless spending and poor judgment, about my father's increasingly unethical practices. And he wrote about me, about how he had watched me grow into someone with integrity. "You have your grandmother's heart," he wrote. "She always believed that wealth was a responsibility, not a reward. I see that same spirit in you, Almira. That is why I chose you." Tears streamed down my face as I read this final message from the one person in my family who had truly seen me. The journal detailed the prototypes and patents, all in my name now. There were designs for solar collection systems, orders of magnitude more efficient than current technology, battery storage solutions that could hold charge for months, revolutionary wind energy approaches. This wasn't just valuable, this was world-changing. I spent hours reading through his notes, examining the prototypes. By the time I climbed back upstairs, night had fallen, and my mind was reeling. For the first time since the will reading, I felt something other than pain. I felt purpose. I felt chosen. But I was also terrified. I was an architect, not an engineer. I had no idea how to move forward. What I did have was determination. And after years of being dismissed, I had a fierce desire to prove everyone wrong. The next morning, I spent hours at the public library researching. I learned about patent law, venture capital, the renewable energy market. I made lists of experts I would need to consult. I was so absorbed that I didn't notice the expensive black SUV outside until I walked out. The door opened, and Preston stepped out, looking wildly out of place in his designer suit. My heart sank. I had known they would come eventually. Preston's smile was sharp as he approached. "Surprise visit, little sister. Thought I'd come see your wilderness retreat." His eyes scanned the small town with barely concealed contempt. "How did you find me?" "Please, you think I don't have ways of tracking you?" "I've been doing some research into grandfather's property records. Seems like he invested quite a bit into this place. A lot more than you'd spend on a simple cabin." My blood ran cold, he suspected. "It's just a cabin, Preston. You saw the will." "See, I don't think that's true. I think the old man was hiding something, and whatever it is, it's too valuable to be left in your hands." I moved quickly, putting myself between Preston and my car. "This is my property. You're not invited." Genuine surprise flashed across his face. I had never directly opposed him like this. "Is that so?" He laughed, but there was an edge now. "Almira, be reasonable. Whatever grandfather left here, you can't possibly manage it. Let the family help you." "The way you've helped me so far?" "No, thank you." Preston's expression darkened. He took a step forward, anger in his eyes. "Listen carefully. I don't know what you think you're playing at, but this is out of your league. Whatever is in that cabin belongs to this family. Sign it over to me, or I will make your life a living hell. Get away from me. Get back in your car and go back to New York. You have no power here." We stood there in the parking lot, locked in confrontation. Then Preston's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and whatever he saw made him pause. "This isn't over. Not even close." He turned and strode back to his SUV, tearing out of the parking lot. I stood there, shaking, hardly able to believe I had stood up to Preston for the first time in my life. But I knew he would be back. And next time, he wouldn't come alone. 3 days later, I looked out the cabin window to see 3 luxury vehicles pulling up. My parents and Preston, plus several people carrying briefcases. Lawyers. I met them at the door, blocking the entrance. My father looked at me with cold calculation. "Almira, this has gone on long enough. We know there's something valuable here. Arthur's tax returns show significant investments in equipment, all shipped here. Whatever he built belongs to Vance Industries. Actually, it belongs to me." The will was very clear. My mother pushed forward, her expression soft and concerned. "Sweetheart, we're just trying to help. You're not equipped to handle this. Let Preston take charge. We'll set up a trust fund for you, $5 million. You'll never have to work again." $5 million. A month ago, that would have seemed like an impossible fortune. Now, it felt like an insult. "What I really want is for all of you to leave my property." One of the lawyers stepped forward. "Miss Vance, perhaps you should review these documents before making rash decisions." He held out a folder, but I didn't take it. Instead, I pulled out my phone, opening the recorder app I had started when I saw their cars. "I'm going to need all of you to leave now. You're trespassing on private property. If you don't leave immediately, I'll call the police." My father's face turned red. "You ungrateful little bitch. After everything we've done for you, you're going to throw it in our faces like this? Every opportunity? You mean where you made it clear I would never be good enough? Where you dismissed everything I cared about as worthless? Those opportunities? How dare you speak to your father that way?" My mother hissed. "You raised me to believe I was worthless unless I served the family's interests. Well, I'm done serving. This is mine, and I'm keeping it." I stepped back and reached for the door, but Preston lunged forward, grabbing my wrist. His grip was painfully tight. "Let her go," a voice said from behind them. We all turned to see Sheriff Martinez standing next to her patrol car, hand resting on her service weapon. "Is there a problem here, Miss Vance?" "These people are trespassing on my property, Sheriff. I've asked them to leave multiple times." Sheriff Martinez looked from me to my family, taking in Preston's grip on my wrist. "That true? You folks were asked to leave?" "This is a family matter," my father said, trying charm. "Sir, I'm going to need you and your party to get in your vehicles and leave this property. We don't care much for bullying out here in Whispering Pines." There was a long, tense moment. Then my father jerked his head at Preston, who released my wrist. They retreated to their vehicles. But before they left, my father rolled down his window. "You're going to regret this, Almira. I promise you that. We will take back what belongs to this family, no matter what it costs." After they left, Sheriff Martinez smiled at me. "Small towns take care of their own. And Almira, whatever they want from you, don't let them intimidate you." The next morning, I called a patent attorney in Portland named Rebecca Chen. When I explained what I had found, there was a long pause. "Miss Vance, if what you're describing is real, we need to meet immediately, and we need to secure those patents before anyone else tries to claim them." Rebecca drove out 2 days later. She spent hours in the laboratory, photographing everything, reviewing documentation. When she emerged, her expression was serious. "Almira, do you understand what you have here? These technologies could be worth billions, but people will come after this. Are you prepared for that fight?" I thought about my family, about the cold hatred in my father's eyes. "I don't have a choice. This was meant for me. I'm not giving it up." "Good, then let's get to work." Over the next weeks, Rebecca helped me file provisional patents on everything. We documented every prototype, every design, every scrap of research. She helped me set up a company to hold the intellectual property. I called it Vance Legacy, but even as we worked, I knew the storm was coming. The lawsuit arrived by courier 6 weeks after the will reading. Preston was suing me for undue influence, claiming I had manipulated my grandfather during his final years. He was also claiming any intellectual property belonged to Vance Industries. The allegations were outrageous but brilliant in their cruelty. If Preston could convince a court my grandfather hadn't been of sound mind, the will could be invalidated. Rebecca was furious. "This is garbage. They have no evidence. But they're going to drag this out, make it expensive, try to force you to settle." "I won't settle, not for any amount." "Good, because I think we can beat this, but you need to be prepared. This is going to get ugly." What I wasn't prepared for was the media circus. Somehow, the story leaked to the press. Headlines were brutal. "Family fortune fight, Vance granddaughter accused of elder manipulation." My phone rang constantly with reporters. News vans showed up in Whispering Pines. But then something unexpected happened. Tom from the hardware store showed up with other townspeople. They formed a human wall between my cabin and the reporters. Maggie brought me groceries. Sheriff Martinez started patrolling regularly. "We take care of our own," Maggie told me. "And you're one of us now." Their support meant more than I could express. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. As the case moved toward trial, Rebecca and I built our defense. We tracked down people who had known my grandfather in his final years, medical records proving he had been in perfect mental health, witnesses who could testify to his intentions. But the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Rebecca had hired a forensic accountant to review Vance Industries' financial records. What she found was explosive. For 8 years, Preston and my father had been systematically embezzling from Vance Industries. They had set up shell companies, fake vendors, inflated contracts. They had siphoned off millions to fund lavish lifestyles, to cover Preston's gambling debts. Vance Industries was teetering on bankruptcy. They needed my grandfather's patents desperately, not to honor his legacy, but to cover up their crimes. "This is it," Rebecca said. "This is why they're so desperate. Without those patents, the whole house of cards comes tumbling down." "Can we use this in court?" "Oh, we're definitely using this. But Almira, you need to understand what this means. When this comes out, your family will be destroyed. Your father and brother could go to prison. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about my mother throwing the suitcase at my feet. I thought about my father saying my existence was an embarrassment. I thought about Preston's cruelty. They made their choices. I'm just making sure there are consequences. The trial was held in Portland. Media attention was intense. I sat at the defendant's table with Rebecca, watching as Preston and his team of lawyers arranged themselves across the aisle. My parents sat behind Preston. They thought they had already won. I could see it in their expressions. What they didn't know was what we had discovered about their crimes. Preston's lawyers went first, painting a picture of a vulnerable old man susceptible to manipulation. They brought in a doctor who testified Arthur had shown signs of confusion. They showed emails, they claimed, demonstrated my undue influence. When it was our turn, Rebecca started dismantling their case. She brought in my grandfather's primary care physician, who testified Arthur had been in excellent mental health. She presented journal entries showing clear, rational thought. She brought in Harold Kim, the engineer who had worked with my grandfather. Arthur Vance knew exactly what he was doing, Harold testified. He told me multiple times that he was disappointed in how his son and grandson were running the company. He believed Almira was different. He believed she would use his inventions to help people, not enrich herself. I saw my father's jaw tighten, saw Preston whisper urgently to his lawyers. But the real bombshell came on the 4th day. Rebecca stood and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, the plaintiff has claimed Arthur Vance's technology belongs to Vance Industries. We would like to present evidence that goes directly to why the plaintiff is so desperate to obtain these patents. Over the next hour, Rebecca systematically presented the evidence of embezzlement, bank records, shell companies, forged signatures, 8 years of systematic theft, millions stolen. The courtroom erupted. Preston's lawyers objected frantically. The judge called for order. Your Honor, Rebecca continued, this isn't just about a disputed inheritance. This is about why Arthur Vance made the choices he did. He knew his son and grandson were criminals. He knew they were destroying everything he had built. He chose his granddaughter because she was the only person in his family he could trust. I watched my father's face turn white, then red. I watched my mother grip the railing, and I watched Preston, for the first time in his life, look genuinely afraid. The judge called a recess, and when we reconvened, he announced he was referring the financial evidence to the district attorney for criminal investigation. On the witness stand, I told my story. I talked about my grandfather, about finding the laboratory, about understanding for the first time that someone in my family had believed in me. Preston's lawyers tried to shake me on cross-examination, but I had the truth on my side. When Preston took the stand, he crumbled. Under Rebecca's questioning, he contradicted himself repeatedly, got defensive and angry, and finally tried to justify the theft as maintaining the family's standard of living. So you admit you took money from the company for personal expenses? Rebecca asked calmly. It was family money. I was a family member. I had every right to it. Was it family money? Or was it money that belonged to shareholders and investors? Preston had no good answer. The trial lasted 2 weeks. By the end, it was clear Preston and my father had betrayed everyone's trust. When the judge delivered his verdict, his voice was stern. The lawsuit was dismissed in its entirety. My grandfather's will would stand. All property and intellectual assets were mine. But then the judge went further. He was ordering an immediate criminal investigation into Vance Industries. He was freezing the company's assets and removing both Edward and Preston from all leadership positions. This court does not look kindly on those who would abuse positions of trust, the judge said, looking directly at my father. He dismissed the court, and chaos erupted. Federal marshals moved forward to take Preston and my father into custody. My mother screamed. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. I sat frozen, watching it all unfold. This was my family, and I had just helped destroy them. Rebecca put a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing. I nodded, because I did know it, but that didn't make it hurt any less. The media firestorm that followed was intense. The Vance scandal was front-page news for weeks. Preston and my father were formally charged with fraud and embezzlement. My mother lost everything when assets were frozen. Vance Industries was dismantled to pay back defrauded investors. I could have felt guilty. Part of me did, but mostly, I felt relief. The truth was finally out. In the aftermath, I focused on what I could control. I worked with Rebecca to finalize patent applications. I consulted with engineers and scientists. And I made a decision about what kind of company I wanted to build. Vance Legacy wouldn't be like Vance Industries. It would be a public benefit corporation, legally committed to balancing profit with purpose. We would develop the clean energy technology, but in a way that prioritized accessibility over shareholder returns. I hired employees from Whispering Pines and surrounding communities. People laid off from the declining logging industry. I partnered with the local community college to create training programs. As Vance Legacy grew, it would lift up the community that had welcomed me. It wasn't easy. Starting a tech company from scratch never is. We faced skepticism, resistance, constant scrutiny because of my family's scandal, but we persevered. The first prototype generator went online 18 months after the trial, producing clean power for a rural community in eastern Oregon that had never had consistent electricity. The look on people's faces when they could turn on lights for the first time made every difficult day worth it. 2 years after I arrived in Whispering Pines, Vance Legacy employed 200 people. We had contracts with communities in 12 states. We were profitable, sustainable, and making a real difference. I never went back to New York. Whispering Pines was where I belonged, where I had found purpose. I renovated the cabin, keeping its rustic character but making it warm and functional. The laboratory remained secret, now serving as a workshop. On my office wall, I hung my grandfather's journal, open to that first page. To Almira, my guiding star. Preston and my father both received significant prison sentences. 10 years for Preston, 12 for my father. My mother moved to a small apartment in Connecticut. She sent me a letter once, months after the trial. It wasn't an apology, more of a justification. I never responded. Some relationships are too broken to fix, and that's okay. On the 3-year anniversary of my grandfather's death, I stood on the renovated porch, looking out over the valley. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. This cabin, this property my family had viewed as worthless, had been the greatest gift anyone had ever given me. Not because of the technology, though that was valuable, but because it had been a declaration of faith. My grandfather had known I didn't need money. What I needed was the chance to prove myself, the tools to make a difference, and the freedom to become who I was meant to be. I heard a car coming up the drive and turned to see Rebecca's sedan. She had become more than my attorney. She was my friend, my advisor, my partner in building something that mattered. She got out carrying champagne in a folder. Guess what just came through? The EPA granted approval for our water purification system. We're going to bring clean water to communities dealing with contamination for decades. I felt tears prick at my eyes. He would be so proud. He already was proud. That's why he chose you. Rebecca climbed the porch steps. Happy anniversary, by the way. I wasn't ready when I arrived. I was terrified. Maybe. But you did it anyway. That's what matters. We opened the champagne and toasted to my grandfather, to Vance's legacy, to the future we were building. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. I had been tested in ways I never imagined. I had faced down my family, their threats and their cruelty. I had stood in a courtroom and told my truth, had watched as their empire came crashing down. And I had survived. More than survived, I had thrived. The girl who had arrived in Whispering Pines with nothing but a rusty key and a wounded heart was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who had built something meaningful, who had turned an inheritance of faith into a legacy of hope. I didn't need my family's approval anymore. I didn't need their money, or their name, or their validation. I had everything I needed right here, in this small town, surrounded by people who valued integrity over image. My grandfather had left me more than patents and prototypes. He had left me the chance to become who I was always meant to be, and I had taken that chance and turned it into something beautiful. Looking out over the valley, feeling the cool evening breeze, I smiled. For the first time in my life, I felt completely at peace, completely free, completely myself. This was what winning looked like. Not the hollow victory of revenge, but the deep, sustaining joy of living a life aligned with your values, of making a real difference, of knowing you honored the faith someone placed in you. My grandfather had called me his guiding star, but in truth, he had been mine, lighting a path I didn't even know existed, showing me there was another way to be a Vance, another kind of legacy to build. And I would spend the rest of my life proving him right.